Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFA York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the fourth session in our 2026 Emergency Management in Hospitals and Healthcare Speaker Series, presented in partnership with the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center. I would like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. First Nations peoples have lived on this part of Turtle Island for millennia, stewarding the land, the water, and all that contributes to life in this region. Today, the culture and presence of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples enrich the lands and people of this territory. More than 2 centuries ago, the Mississauga people welcomed settlers to this territory, providing sustenance and engaging in trade and commerce. Between 1781 and 1820, 8 treaties were signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who opened their territory to settlement. Today, York University's Keele campus is located on Toronto Purchase Treaty Number 13 lands and is situated on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee. Treaty history is foundational, and it is our collective responsibility to honor the land as we honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We are grateful for the opportunity to be learning, working, and thriving on this land, and we commit to learn the truth and be active in the process of reconciliation. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Misha Richard. Misha Richard is the current Emergency Preparedness Lead for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. For the sake of time, Misha's full bio, as well as the bios of all of our speakers today, will be shared in the chat. Misha, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing help in putting together this series. The floor is yours.
Well, hello, everybody, and also happy Emergency Preparedness Week to everybody who's calling in from somewhere in Canada. I want to thank all of our panelists. This is a very large panel that we have for you this month, including representation from 5 different provinces. So I appreciate that we are bridging a number of time zones in order to make this talk work. I also want to acknowledge, as Francesco said, that we have some very extensive bios that we can share with lots of details of our speakers, but I'll just take a brief moment to introduce everybody who's with us. So first, I'll introduce Mary Charter. She is the Executive Director and Chief Provincial Health Emergency Management Officer for Health Emergency Management BC, the Provincial Health Services Authority. She's also the founder of the North American Code Silver Network, which was how we got linked initially. So thank you for joining us today, Mary. I'll also welcome Shailee Benson. She is an emergency and disaster management specialist at Hamilton Health Sciences in Hamilton, Ontario. Then we also have Shane Fitzpatrick. I'm not going by province here, you can tell. So Shane is currently an emergency management officer with Alberta Health Services in the Calgary zone. Then I also want to welcome Michael Wrobel, who's a project manager with emergency preparedness with Unity Health Toronto and Toronto, Ontario. We also have Pascal Rodier, who's the Provincial Director of Emergency Preparedness with Nova Scotia Health Authority. And then, last but not least, I also have Jeff Whyte. And Jeff is our Horizon Health Network's Regional Lead for Security and Safety Services that rounds up our panel today. So for folks that haven't been here before, the really quick housekeeping is that we do have a chat. Feel free to use that to communicate amongst yourselves. I'm sure there's going to be lots of conversation to be had there between all the attendees. But if you have a question that you would like us to direct to our panelists, please use the Q&A function, especially if you have something that you would like directed to a particular speaker. All of this being said, this is a huge topic that a lot of individuals are very passionate about, and 1 hour is not going to do this justice. So I will acknowledge right now, we're probably going to scratch the surface on this topic, but I will also put in the chat once Francesco is finished sharing everybody's bio info, that this series did have one previous session held a couple of years ago on Code Silver with our guest speaker, Tammy Ryan, who is with the Sioux Area Hospital. And during that session, we did have a fairly robust overview of what is Code Silver. So if you want additional context, we'll provide those links in the chat. So without further ado, if everybody is primed to get going, I'd like to start off with, do you have a process for a threat that's inside your building versus outside your building. I think this is something that's a good place to start. So for anybody that's watching, we've used the word lockdown in the title of this presentation. I know for some folks that language might apply to Code Silver, which we'll get into, but I think it's relevant to just discuss if we have everything covered in one umbrella or if we have some different strategies for when we have a violent threat outside versus inside your buildings. Who wants to jump on that first and share some of what you're doing at your organization?
Misha, I don't mind starting.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, fantastic. So, oh, sorry, did I miss something here?
No, go ahead, Jeff, and then I'll go over to Shailee.
Oh, okay, fantastic, 100%. So yes, we do have a distinction between, right, what would constitute an internal threat versus an external threat. This is relatively new to us from the perspective of certainly not from the research, but with respect to rollout, right, within our organization. We're actually just in the process of developing our e-learning right now. One of the things that we really wanted to do with an active assailant was to use plain language, right? We did not want to have that buried as a subset within another emergency code somewhere. We really wanted to tease that out. So that's what we're doing. We've developed a policy that supports that as well as the processes around it. So yes, we do make a distinction between the two.
Okay, and then Shailee, what about for you folks? Threat in the building versus recognizing a threat external to the building?
Yeah, so at HHS, we have a code lockdown policy and 3 categories within that. So our category 1 is more the hold and secure for likely an internal threat, or sorry, an external threat, and possibly the victim has become internal. We have a risk matrix as well that we have available for our team to review in determining what category we need. Category 2 is limited access to the hospital when this could kind of be when going back to the pandemic. So if we want to consider that threat of its own, but it may also be something in the community where we're locking down just the exterior entrances with security, of course, and we're looking more at just controlling the access. People are still allowed out. And then category 3, which would be our highest level of lockdown, is what we might see during a Code Silver or an active attacker event, which is full lockdown, no entry in or out, very limited movement. So we just have those categories within our code lockdown policy and that helps us determine where the threat is coming from and what level to implement.
So you can already see right off the bat why I wanted to mention this, because I know when we've communicated with peers, there's some organizations that have a one-stop policy that's kind of capturing any sort of armed threat, whether they're inside or outside. And then some other organizations that have developed some sort of rich risk matrix, like what you're mentioning, Shailee, where it's like, well, there could be a number of different threats that might require us to have some security controls to the building. Doesn't necessarily mean it's always tied directly to weapon of some kind. Mary, you've got your hand up.
Nothing new, but it's just interesting to see the variation across the provinces and the stages. And so in British Columbia has distinct health authorities throughout the province, but we do have one Code Silver active attacker policy and procedure that was implemented in October of 2022 for British Columbia. And with that, we have an online 15-minute training module, and also a 60-minute in-person training that was previously delivered by Health Emergency Management, the program that I oversee, but then also in collaboration with Protection Services, which is hospital security services, and workplace health and safety, as well as a bit of a triad partnership there in that. And then we also have an online training video as well. For that to be able to deliver. And so it is it's plain language as well, just in that vein with best practice for Code Silver active attackers. We don't announce a code overhead. It's always the plain language about what is happening, where it's happening, and it is distinguished by an individual who's actively engaged in harming, attempting to harm or attempting to kill a person with a weapon. We didn't limit it to a firearm because in different contexts and the capabilities of variation of different types of instruments that can be used. And so it also varies because we do have different health authorities in the province and different levels of maturity in our programs that deliver on the training and with our infrastructure. We don't use lockdown. It's more controlled access and restricted access. And that is not just for an active attacker, but of course it's applied in many different scenarios as well. And so it's attached to it as well. If there's a run, hide, fight global best practice within the facility or on facility grounds, but then also the additional measure if there is an external threat that exists, then do you implement which level of controlled measures for a facility to protect those within and around the state? So I just wanted to, we keep it simplified in that sense because we do the principle of the first 30 seconds is more important than the 30 minutes of perfection as well, and to take that pressure off of folks to be able to make that assessment when it's going and being able to preserve their life first and foremost, and then what are the measures that can be taken as it branches out from that response to with the controlled measures.
So just to double check before I jump over to Mike, so Mary, just to kind of funnel this down, is you're using plain language under the umbrella of saying this is the Code Silver policy. So you would have plain language articulating if somebody had a gun inside the building, but just as simply, you would be articulating, for example, if somebody was seen with a gun outside the building with associated instructions, such as like building occupants to remain inside or something along that line, just to kind of understand that your policy is capturing both scenarios.
It's capturing both. And so then that information that's relayed so that it is plain language, so there's clarity initially. Are we enacting controlled measures, restricted access to the facility or within departments based on campus size, or is it an immediate response action required within for folks to be able to go and then being able to have the subsequent actions?
Okay, and Mike, over to you. You've got the next hand up.
All right. So for our organization, we have two separate and distinct policies, one for external threats. And again, it's not just reserved for active attacker or for an individual with a firearm. It could be anything from civil disobedience or a large crowd, protesters coming through, just being in an environment where we're in a very dense urban environment, being downtown Toronto. We see a lot of different events occurring in our city. In regards to the Code Silver policy, we do have a distinct active attacker policy. And I use the word active and emphasize the word because we do protect our code. Code Silver, in our eyes, is very low probability but high impact for our organization, being a level 1 trauma center downtown. We also have St. Joe's in Providence, but for St. Mike specifically, we have a lot of clinical decisions that have to be made when a Code Silver is activated. So we do protect it. The presence of a firearm or the presence of a knife don't necessarily initiate a Code Silver response. So it's really reserved for that active situation where the threat inside the building is mobile and potentially life-threatening to a multiple number of people. Yeah, that's it for me.
That's great. And that's going to bring me up to another point after I get to a couple more hands, which is sort of what doesn't constitute and how do you handle weapons perhaps separately? So parking that for a moment, Pascal, you're the next hand on my screen.
Thanks. Much to Shailee's point, we've kept access control and lockdown, and those are two separate stages, separate from all of our other responses. We don't, like you say, we were in access control for 3 years over COVID. So we don't say that it's because someone's trying to do something bad that we secure our facilities. It could just be any threat, to Michael's point, it could be any, if we have a civil disturbance on the outside of the facility and we just want to secure it. So access control, lockdown, completely separate, not part of any other response plan that we have. And we'll get into it after, but we were very distinct in that we've kept a person with a weapon different than active shooter. We went plain language, not active attacker, not active aggressor, active shooter. I want there to be zero question when that's happening. So again, low likelihood, very low likelihood, especially in Canada. But I want there to be nothing, no confusion. And then a person with a weapon, there's a whole variance with that. Inside, outside, presenting, not threatening, finding a weapon that's not a threat. Our facilities have more weapons of opportunity than people bring into them. So, anything's a weapon according to the Criminal Code of Canada. So you got to be very careful when we do that blanket response. So we really define the two. We pulled active shooter out, plain language, and it's the first step of like getting rid of color codes, I hope. So it's, but that's the move we've made. Yeah.
Okay, so we're also seeing here now for all the audience, again, variation, lots of variation. There's a lot of navigation that has to happen with some of those things that can be very, very clear, like active shooter to Pascal's recent point, versus again, getting back to some of those access control considerations for other types of threats that might be outside the building as well. Shane, you're the last hand, and then we'll move on to another point.
I'll be real quick, and I like Pascal how you said getting rid of the other coded language. In Alberta, same thing. We go straight to an active assailant with somebody with a weapon trying to cause mass harm within the facility. I'm glad I went last though, because I've learned a lot just from the other panelists on. We have a lockdown, and we use plain language for lockdown as well. But it's a little bit confusing. It's a springboard emergency response plan, depending on the information that's coming in. So we don't actually have two separate plans for external and internal, but I think there's a lot that we can flush out from what's been said into that plan, just to make it a little less confusing. Because I know doing exercises at the facilities, the lockdown is confusing unit to unit, and the capabilities unit to unit are different as well. So thanks to the panelists.
No, it's really, I do find this as well, because again, for anybody that's attending here, you don't have to be in healthcare to find the terms of lockdown, hold and secure, seek shelter. Those different terms have some different meanings, whether you're considering something to be weather, somebody with a weapon, somebody that's, inside your facility. Are you barricading? All of those sorts of considerations hopefully show those on the line why it's a struggle to say this is the best practice across the country. So this will take me to something else here, because now I've heard a little bit of variance already, which is there's a couple of organizations that are saying plain language. But Pascal, you said it's got to be a gun. Jeff, you just mentioned, an active assailant, so a weapon. But I would like to wonder, is anybody else limiting this sort of response of Code Silver to being a shooter? Or have you teased it out in the way that Pascal was saying in Nova Scotia, where if it's a shooter, we're just separating that one out? So wondering how we're defining Code Silver and the weapons that come under that umbrella. So who'd like to go first on? Yeah, well, Shane, you're still on my screen and your hand was up first, so please carry on.
I figured I went last time, so I'll jump in here first. So again, using the plain language active assailant is not specific to a weapon for Alberta Health Services. So it could be an edged weapon, it could be blunt weapons, a weapon of opportunity that somebody's grabbed within the hospital, but they're actually causing mass harm. Improvised weapons, BC just had your anniversary from the Lapu Lapu festival here in April, where a car was used. So other means of unintentional harm is all umbrellaed, I think, under the active assailant. But the focus is on behavior and intent versus what type of weapon is being used for us.
Okay, and Mary, you're up next.
I think that to Shane, yes, we are neighbors, BC and Alberta. And when we were developing our active attacker procedures, I worked with Alberta Health quite a bit on this. And so you'll see the similarities. It is the same thing. It's blunt, edged, weapon of opportunity, anything that is capable of causing that harm. The behavior is the key indicator for that. It's about the threat to the safety of those. And it can be, we don't want it to limit to a firearm, just because, like to Shane's point, vehicles can be used as well. But those that are able, it's about the response as well. What is the type of response that you are wanting to initiate? It's the combination of that equation of the item, the ability of that item to be able to cause harm in the hands of the person and the behavior that they're exhibiting, and what is the response that you want. If you want people to be able to move, you want people to move away from that. That is within that Code Silver umbrella. If you want to have that response team to come and de-escalate, then you have the code Whyte response. If you have someone over there, they're doing, they have the active attacker, not immediate safety, it's in the community, then we need to have safety measures implemented to protect those within in case, because they move and they're very fast moving, of course, too. So it's a combination of those, and it's a very uncomfortable space for a lot of people because there's a lot of gray, and it's based on personal assessment, your personal risk assessment, and to those around. And that makes people uncomfortable when we live in, to Pascal's point, when we have codes for everything and a very designated response, there's always going to be a gray for something like this because it's unpredictable human behavior, and everyone has different levels of risk to their safety in their own assessments. So I just wanted to be able to touch on that as well, about that gray area that exists.
Okay, so before I get to you, Shailee, recapping, we've got BC and Alberta don't limit their Code Silver response to specifically firearms. And Nova Scotia has a response that's in plain language specific to firearms. But Pascal, I know your hand's up, so I'll get back to you in a second. But Shailee, what are you doing in Hamilton?
It won't take too long because it is very similar to the last, I guess I'll say BC and Alberta, but among the very same lines, it is active attacker weapon as defined by the criminal code. We're not limiting it to a firearm or a shooter. We are still finding our old policies have shooter mentioned, and we are in the process of more updating that to reflect attacker. Again, we're just looking at the risk, the amount of people that are subject to harm, and how to get them safe as fast as possible. So that's why we include the attacker, not just firearm.
And Pascal, you want to add a little bit more on how things are kind of separated out in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, just so there's no confusion, we still call it Code Silver. That's phase 2 of me getting rid of color codes. Code Silver is a person with a weapon and stop, anything, baseball bat, what have you. But I would offer, especially in emergency management, we have to do things on a risk assessment. And the damage that can be done by a person waving an IV pole and a gun are two different things. The response that we expect people to do is completely different. Run, hide, fight is for firearms. That keeps people alive. And if someone calls active shooter in one of our facilities, I expect the OR to leave. I expect people to abandon patients because we don't know where that very specific style of threat is going to move. Baseball bat and knife, I just need something big between me and you to protect me. People aren't going to drive cars through our whole buildings. So we've kept a weapon separate from active shooter so that we still have weapon, and we have categories on how to approach, send some people in depending on what the scenario is. But we've separated active shooter as the big key piece there, because we want there to be zero discrepancy when that happens. In any of our facilities, because it is, and it's a different police response. How they respond to somebody waving a bat and how they respond to an active shooter. IARD responses are completely different than just attending somebody who's angry waving around a clipboard, right? They are. The mentality, the style of approach, the expectation of law enforcement when they arrive is completely different than an active shooter. So that's why we separated the two. We really, very low likelihood, but we wanted it separate. Code Silver, person with a weapon, and then it fits into different thresholds of criteria. Are they actually threatening? Are they just presenting with a weapon and they're not a threat? Because that's 99% of our people that come into our facilities. So just want to be clear on that. We still have it. Just want to be clear.
No, and that's really great context to provide to everybody in the panel. And also you touched on that one piece that I think for anybody that's not from healthcare and is attending this session, when we think of calling out a Code Silver, or in the case of Nova Scotia announcing an active shooter, that is the sort of scenario where the OR stops, surgery stop. And so this has to have some consideration before we're stopping all hospital operations. And so again, this is a bit different than when there's a lockdown in a school versus trying to have some sort of similar response in a hospital. So a little bit of context, again, peppered in there. Mike, I have an idea of what you're going to say, and I'm biased and I've communicated with Mike before a little bit about some of the process there. So jump in and kind of explain how things are done where you're at.
Yeah, so for our organization, and I can appreciate Pascal's concerns and just having that distinction between a firearm and some other weapons of opportunity. This is something that we've also discussed when we were developing our policy. One thing that we really emphasized was intent, just like Mary stated, and sort of the mobility of that individual. Now, weapons of opportunity, of course, are interpretive. To one individual, an IV pole might be pose a greater threat. To another individual, of an edged weapon might just be another day at the office. Unfortunately, so really, one of the key things is training and education. Is really having staff understand the response. And Mary touched on this. It's really emphasizing what is it that we want. Do we want people to scatter, hide, run immediately because this is a grave situation where many people will get hurt, potentially killed. So when we do training and emphasize this in our sessions with staff, is that response and how is this individual presenting themselves? Is this somebody who's in a room with a knife and they're simply venting, or is this somebody who's now gone past that threshold? They're walking up and down the unit. They're potentially slashing people. They're attempting to slash individuals. So we really wanted to include edge weapons as well in our Code Silver policy. And I did want to sort of emphasize that edge weapons are extremely dangerous. We've seen mass stabbing incidents all across the region. I mean, Manitoba last year, we had that incident at the reserve. So, when we think of firearms, we think a lot of individuals can be killed in a short amount of time, but edge weapons are just as dangerous, I think. And we have to appreciate that anybody can come into our hospital, especially, in our environment. A lot of individuals carry edge weapons. They're not hard to get. Anybody can buy one, conceal it. So that's something that we kind of lean towards based on our risk assessment and our environment.
And Jeff, what about New Brunswick? You'll round up this question for us.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Misha. I actually just wanted to say, like, this is some excellent conversation, right, and some discussion that's going here. As somebody who has done a pile of research on this, that's always the key, right? We've heard everybody along the way speak to it. When you look at your behaviors, right? What is it exactly that the behavior that the individual is exhibiting? What do we want our staff to do? I think this all comes right back to our definitions, making sure we're very clear, and to Michael's point a minute ago, ensuring that education supports that, because we know that if it's unclear at this level, right, and we're working through it, you can only imagine what that looks like to frontline staff, right? So when we start to educate, when we start to even to exercise, right, that's where we're really going to have that uptake and that learning occur. And let's be honest, it's the frontline that we need to get this message to. Right. So, just great conversation. Ours are distinct and separate, as I had said originally, just to finish off on that one. Active assailant is active assailant. We do have a subset, of course, within our code, Whyte, for a person with a weapon. That was never intended. I mean, if we look back to when that was rolled out, it was years ago, and it was never intended for an active assailant or an active shooter situation, right? Simply an individual who grabs, as Michael had said, like maybe an IV pole and is holding people at bay, right? Does not want to take medication, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and so I'll just touch on this actually. So what Jeff just brought up, and from Michael's, I thought he might loop this piece in, which is why I got excited, which is there's sort of the continuum that we've talked about a little bit here, and I think some of the education leaning into that conversation is here in our organization, trying to explain that we have had police come on site to support. But that is not somebody that's mobile. It's not somebody that's a threat to the entire organization. It could be that a code Whyte has escalated because somebody now has a weapon of opportunity. And that's just how we're doing things here. But part of that was the acknowledgement that people can have a weapon and there can be some intent to use that. And there has to be a bit of an assessment, especially if it's something that's stemming from a code Whyte situation. Do we need to stop surgeries right now? Or is this something where the responders need to give that person additional space, and we may need to have law enforcement come in to kind of address the situation further? So I think maybe one of the other questions would be, if we haven't made it clear, if anybody wants to make a last point, is what isn't a part of this process for you? What doesn't constitute? So for us, definitely it's kind of code white with police involvement, gives us a bit more wiggle room for some situations versus folks leaning into our code silver or active attacker process every time there's a weapon that's on site. So any kind of thoughts as far as what you don't consider to be a part of your processes for code silver? Yeah, Mary, please go ahead. I was going to say if anybody has some final thoughts on it. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say exactly what you said, Misha, are the code white, the response. So it's not included when you want people to come to, there's an opportunity for de-escalation or it's an agitated person. The continuum for a code white is quite large. And it goes from, someone yelling and, swearing and agitated because there's opportunity for de-escalation up to, okay, they have something in their hands, they have a weapon, but they're not actively engaged or attempting. There's still opportunity there to create that space, as to Pascal had said too. The code silver needs to be, from our perspective in BC, very defined in that, because it is highly, when it's inactive, when it's implemented, it is very disruptive. You are stopping services, you are interfering with direct patient care. And you're causing that disruption and the recovery process as well. So it needs to be very distinct and not diluted to fit in within that continuum. It needs to exist as its own because it's very specific response and within that behavior. So with it, if there's that opportunity for de-escalation, if it's someone, with just a pen or whichever, if there's not that capability of causing that mass harm, they're actively engaged, then that still exists within that continuum. So I just want to be very clear about really having some hard line boxes around the code silver active attacker piece in it.
Yeah, and Shane, I saw your hand up, and I was going to joke that I feel like a colleague many moons ago said, well, everybody in Alberta is walking around maybe with like a knife on their belt anyway. We're not going to stop services just because somebody, has that as kind of a part of their normal day-to-day wear. So I saw your hand come up and go down. Did you still want to jump in and speak to this?
I will quickly. Mary touched
Yeah.
on most of what I wanted to say, but I mean, we've had confusion over the years with we don't have a code or a plan around somebody with a weapon. So just recently we've updated our code white, like Mary talked about, kind of widening that continuum to have an escalation pathway where, maybe it doesn't start off with somebody with a weapon, they grab a weapon of opportunity or they pull an edge weapon, and now we're pulling people back. But I think there's some more to flesh out there for sure on that piece. But for our active assailant, it is that and I think Michael, I think you touched on this. It's the word active. Somebody's actively engaged in attempting to kill or kill people. So it's not a patient or a visitor in possession of a weapon, even if they're waving it around. But as soon as they become active with that weapon, then we switch into that active assailant.
Great. And I'm sorry, Jeff, you had your hand up, or did we touch on it enough? You're welcome to pipe up.
Yeah, you did. No, sorry, Misha. I was just going to say, I think it comes back to having it very, very clearly defined, right? That's what we're hearing from everybody on this call. Having it defined, active assailant is different than an individual, in my opinion, than an individual who brandishes a weapon of opportunity, right? Depending on what that weapon is and how active they become with it, right? So I think the definition for your active assailant has to be teased out, has to be crystal clear, right? And that message has to be permeated throughout the organization.
And Mike, last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing up that continuum piece. Again, yes, situations evolve, but I do want to raise one question to the panel. One thing that I thought about just kind of going through this scenario, an individual that brandishes a firearm and isn't mobile, isn't necessarily, active, but they are making threats. Um, you know, Again, it comes down to interpretation. I think it's really hard to get that very standard language across the board when it comes to some of these scenarios. So that's just one thing to consider. And in regards to having that code white sort of threshold or continuum, we did include weapons within the code white. We have a code white caution. I don't want to get into it too deep today, but it does include a potential weapon. So it could be a weapon of opportunity. It could be something blunt. A knife, maybe in the presence of somebody who isn't actively brandishing it, but that does include an escalated response. It brings teams in a cautious manner, and it keeps staff away from that department. But we also, to maybe kind of, we also have police presence in the ED quite often. So it really changes the threshold. Not that they're expected to help support, but if there's a presence of a knife and a patient's becoming aggressive, it's not uncommon that we may potentially have assistance from the police.
So I'm going to change gears a little bit here and get into some of the practice to say who has the authority to activate whatever this response is in your organization. I don't want to assume that anybody can activate because I feel like we might have some variation here. So does anybody want to clarify who can activate for, I mean, some of you have more than one policy, but just let us know on the call here. Mike, you're still on my screen. Go ahead.
Anybody can activate it. We give everybody the ability to do that based on the severity of the situation.
Mary?
Anyone can activate as well in BC.
Jeff, go ahead.
Anyone can activate here as well, right? Regardless of what it is, whether it's active assailant or whether it's a code white.
Shane?
Yeah, it's same in Alberta. Any staff member who identifies a credible active threat can initiate that active assailant. We haven't talked about notification, and maybe you're going there, but the initial notification is to yell it out so the people in earshot can hear what's going on. And again, that's why we use plain language. And then when it's safe to do so, maybe an overhead page to notify the site. And then as we get into the response piece, that notification to leadership. But there's no requirement to wait for leadership approval for active assailant.
Okay, I'm definitely going to get into notification next, Shane. So that's my follow-up question. Shailee, who can activate this in Hamilton?
We're aligned with everyone else. Anyone is able to activate the Code Silver active attacker. And then just back to our lockdown procedures, our categories 2 and 3, so the higher levels that require the exterior access control and the full lockdown can only be activated by a site director or above. But for the Code Silver, anyone's able to.
And have I, Pascal? I'm going to assume anybody, but yeah, I don't want to be wrong.
Well, I wasn't jumping in. Yeah, no, anybody can call it. Same though as Shailee though for access control and lockdown. Those have to be decisions that are made at a higher level because lockdown's rare for us because that means diverting ambulances. And again, now we start to get into some pretty significant risk issues. And that's again why we've kept things as simple as we could because we don't want people to stop patient care because something's happening 17 floors down from where they are, and or diverting ambulances because something's happening on the 30th floor, right? Like we didn't got to be very careful with this stuff when it's just one thing, hit a button and it just changes everything. That's what we try to avoid with our stuff. So.
Okay, so it sounds like we're all on the same page when we're actually talking about some sort of active attacker situation. Any staff member is empowered to activate that process to immediately take protective action. But how do you get that message communicated out to your organization? So that's like Shane commenting that, you're calling it out in the immediate vicinity, and as soon as safely possible, there's some sort of overhead announcement that's going out. I'm wondering how organizations are doing this. Not everybody has a mass notification tool. Depending on the organization, again, you might have more than one policy or more than one threshold as far as individual with a weapon versus active assailant. Is everything announced the same? Is everything communicated out in the same way? What kind of tools and methods are you using to get this message out to your building occupants that there's an active threat? Shailee.
All right, I can start this one off. So we do have a central switchboard for all of our hospitals. So of course, when safe to do so in an active attacker situation, We encourage staff to call 911 as well as either delegating someone to call our code hotline. It will go overhead in plain language along with the location if known. We also have this on repeat every 5 minutes. So the building is still aware that there is an active attacker, and if they're on the move, they're going to hear where they are. We do also have a mass notification tool, which currently is pushed out by our department, so myself or Andrew, for anyone that does know Andrew. And that will be an immediate trigger from the switchboard team. We get that notification out as soon as possible. However, when it comes to a person with a weapon that falls more towards the code Whyte, we just announced overhead code Whyte, and then we still have old school pagers here, which are actually still very valuable. And on the pager, in that notification to security and the responding code Whyte team, it will indicate if there is a weapon present. So we're not going to advertise overhead that there's a weapon for one person, like the scenario that was kind of given about swinging around an IV pole. But in the active attacker, it will absolutely go overhead in plain language. So everyone can get to safety and follow the protocol as fast as possible.
So just before I get to Mike, I'll give a little context at my organization. We've coached everybody here to contact our switchboard. We've got kind of our internal line as well, to the point that Shailee mentioned. But we've also had to highlight to staff that folks are walking around and you might not be directly adjacent an internal hospital phone to be able to dial that, 2-digit or 4-digit extension to get through to switchboard. And additionally, you might see an individual that poses a threat that's external to the building while you're parking your car, or you're coming into work. So we've really tried to coach everybody to make sure that they have our switchboard phone number programmed right into their phone, so they can immediately get a hold of them for a variety of reasons. Because for us, switchboard will automatically call 911 on our behalf. We feel that it's very important to announce overhead to everybody in the building if there's an actual active attacker, as that sort of first line of communication, since we have overhead paging capability in all areas. Mike, over to you to give us some additional context from Toronto.
I'm going to steal that idea from you and communicate to our staff to put that switchboard number in their cell phones. That's a great idea. Something that I actually didn't think about. For our organization, we do the overhead page. Not everybody has a cell phone. Not everybody has a pager. But one thing that we definitely discussed with Toronto Police, we did a couple seminars or talks to each of our sites. And one of the best practices, or I guess their recommendation, is to call 911 first. That's the first number you should be calling. The response should be immediate. Calling switchboard first sort of delays that response. So best practice, call 911. Get them there as soon as possible. They might be across the street. You might have officers in the ED. They might be able to mobilize and work on a response. Then we tell our staff to call 5555. And one thing that I want to point out is we had this conversation when we were developing our policy. We don't put the onus of calling 911 to the switchboard staff. They're not really aware of what's happening. They're getting secondhand information from frontline staff. So it's the frontline staff. Once they're in a safe space, they can talk, they can make a phone call. We tell them, call switchboard, let them know what's happening, so they get that overhead announcement across the organization. The other thing I want to point out is that we use a combination of our code language and plain language. We do emphasize that it's a life-threatening situation. We indicate where the assailant was located last and to move away from that area. But just for our staff, we do indicate that a code silver is in effect. So it's a combination of both.
Just before we get to Mary, I'm also going to add a little piece that right after this, I want to talk about our tiebacks with our law enforcement partners, because certainly we don't want to develop these procedures in a silo, and we need their input. So don't let me forget. Mary, how are you announcing across your organization?
Well, it's in BC, we have many rural, remote, older facilities. We have very newer, modern facilities. So we have this blend, and then we have facilities that have been retrofitted and built on top of each other. So it's quite a patchwork that we have. So oftentimes, many of our rural, remote facilities don't have overhead announcements. And so that's a challenge. And then many of our place facilities that have had additions put on the overhead doesn't make it to certain areas of the older sites. So it's a very imperfect system across that we're dealing with infrastructure, not only for physical infrastructure when we're talking about access, enacting access, but also in the notifications where some sites have Vocera, some sites have overhead, some sites have phone to phone. So it's really based on which that site is. So the overall procedure is, to Mike as well, call 911 when safe to do so. Again, the same thing. Those who are experiencing it firsthand, they're going to have the most accurate information to be able to provide. And we train on only say what you know. So don't make assumptions. Just only say what you know. How many shots did you hear? How many people did you see injured? Did you see the direction? So being very specific on what, only say what you know. And then to switchboard. And so switchboard, part of our procedure, we have a provincial script that's been given to our switchboards. And it is the plain language, what is happening, where it's happening, what to do. And then again, so then law enforcement, it's at their end to be able to piece together that information about what is the actionable intelligence to be able to enact that response when they show based on what has been provided in that. And so as far as on the site, it varies. Yelling it out. People have WhatsApp groups for their units. People have Signal. It's such an imperfect system. So it's a matter of, rather than trying to fit to something, it's a matter of how do we make this fit within your context, and let's train with that. And again, back to that training, and getting that muscle memory in that too. So however you normally notify, let's not introduce something that's new specifically for this, because you're going to default to what you know. So training to what you have so that you, in the heat of a moment, fight, flight, or freeze, that you will default to what you know and just be able to leverage those processes.
So Shailee, before I get to you, I'm not sure if it still has to do with the notification or if it's leading into the next segue as far as tie back to law enforcement, but wanted to note that even what is announced overhead has been a really good conversation point between us and our local law enforcement. So advice that we had received, respecting the fact that we are one hospital, organization. We are only several floors, unlike Pascal describing, an incident that's happening on the 17th floor versus on the main level. Our feedback was that these are very time sensitive, and we don't want to create a false sense of security by announcing where somebody was last seen when perhaps they've now moved somewhere else within the building. So our feedback from our law enforcement partners was actually not to announce overhead the last location that they were, but ensuring that they're provided with that information so that they might be able to track location. Again, that's respecting our actual physical setup of our building, which I know is not going to apply to others on this call, especially when you have multiple sites that you're responsible for, or some very large towers. Shailee, over to you, and then I do want to switch to just talking about our tie back to our law enforcement partners as an opportunity here.
Yeah, sorry, I just had one more point to make on the notification that in part of our education and in our policy as well, similar to what Mike had mentioned, we always call 911 first, but in cases where it may not be safe to then make an additional phone call, we do have it indicated to ask the 911 operator to notify hospital switchboard. And our policies are done in conjunction with our law enforcement partners. So this can also get over to the hospital, because we do want to push that overhead out as fast as possible, so everyone can start their run, hide, fight.
Yes, a good tie back. So folks here on the call, I'm sure, especially Pascal, when I recognize your background and connections, the connection to law enforcement input on these policies. Tell us how things are collaborative in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, thanks. 100%. I mean, we you say silos, I say pillars of excellence, right? So, we can't just make this stuff up. And that's, again, a lot of the reason why we went the way we did. Much to Mary's point about BC, we're spread across the whole province, and we've got little small rural sites that have got 2 staff, and that's it. There is no security. There is no major support there. So up to our bigger tertiary care and our regional centers. So, from a planning perspective, it has to be We have plans in place. They're the same, but they have to be tailored to the area. And I think it was Shane or Michael that had said that earlier, that, really tailoring it to what is the expectation? What can you do with what you have? In our central zone, Halifax, the Metro Halifax area, we have a different way of notification than we do in other facilities. To Mary's point, we've got a plethora of choices. So working with law enforcement within those jurisdictions, those are limited as well. Some of our small towns have very small police departments with limited response capabilities. Our provincial police, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also does, metropolitan policing in some areas. So, there's such a diversity. So we do work with all of our law enforcement partners. They are engaged. They were engaged with the rewriting of pulling active shooter out. And again, it goes back to that whole piece of how they respond. An active shooter is a different response if they're making their way through a facility shooting people. It's different than somebody just waving a stick around in a locked area where they can't get access to the rest of the facility. So we really do change how those responses are. We don't always engage law enforcement, just because somebody presents with a weapon. It's what are they doing? So really keeping the two separate, and I'm hearing a lot of kind of going back to that run, hide, fight or whatever, but that's again why we really wanted to separate the two, because run, hide, fight's not appropriate for every response. And so we've worked hard with our law enforcement partners. We train with them. We bring them into our facilities as best we can. They're a part of our training, definitely part of our exercise packages when we roll out any type of exercises. The team, I've got an incredible team that does this really well, and they put out this great training package, and there's a whole bunch of different levels to their training, but they do a phenomenal delivery of that to 40,000+ people, which is a big lift, and then the exercises as well. So, but yeah, law enforcement, you can't do this alone with this stuff.
Awesome. Shane, comment about your connection with your law enforcement partners on development of the policies.
Yeah, you bet. And again, just recently, I think law enforcement took away more than some of our hospital sites, just based on the unique challenges that the hospital presents on the response side for them. So they're coming in, with their IR action plan, they're sending in their contact teams, but they don't know where they're going. So our protective services, Alberta Health Service Protective Services have put together go bags. So in the city of Calgary, the sergeant vehicles have these go bags. So they have access cards for swipe access. They have master keys. They have maps to the facility. But they still rely on protective services, CCTV footage or access to that footage, or even wayfinding. So there's a huge relationship there that needs to happen and needs to be pre-planned prior to an event or an incident. And then we've just done that with the HcEM-P in our rural sites. And to Pascal's point there, very few resources in some of the rural areas. So it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a longer response with less resources coming, but they still need that quick access into the facility. But on the learning side for the law enforcement piece was hospitals are different than public spaces, and they can't just come in and lock down and secure and evacuate everybody to take over for crime scene management or evidence collection, right? So there needs to be, again, site command post or leadership intervention early on with the unified command that gets set up. And then protective services for AHS is the liaison between kind of site leadership and law enforcement to have that situational awareness. And what critical clinical operations need to continue because we still have patients that we have to take care of once the threat is neutralized. I'll end it there because we could talk all day. That could be a whole another subject. But there was a lot of learning on the law enforcement side, is for sure. And that relationship. I mean, it was a conversation starter, but relationship.
I appreciate that, Shane. I was going to say, so I'm just flagging to everybody, we only have a few minutes, and I assume we might go just a couple minutes over so we can wrap things up. Definitely somebody was asking in the chat as far as, what sort of committees do you have that are working on this? For us, since it was an established policy, we have a review cycle every 3 years. So we know no matter what, there's going to be a comprehensive review with a working group and police consultation. Really appreciate Shane's very kind of practical points of a go bag, right? How do they get access? We say if somebody comes in with a gun, security isn't armed. They're just another staff member. So they too might be in a position where they are trying to secure themselves in a space. And so how can police easily navigate your facilities? You can't just assume that security is, there and holding the door open for them. Mike, tell me about your tie back with law enforcement, if you will.
Yeah, so we have a very good relationship with Toronto Police. When we were developing our policy, we called upon the unit that usually goes to the schools and talks about hold and secure and different active shooter scenarios. So that team came to each of our sites. They, together with our SIM team and our emergency preparedness team, developed a quick sort of seminar where we discussed site-specific nuances. And one of the very valuable things that Toronto Police provided was the expectations on the staff themselves when they're in a code silver. So when police come in, it's their response, right? They're taking over the situation. They're not going to be assisting with victims right away. They're going to be treating every single person as a potential suspect. So having your hands up, making sure that your ID badge is present or sort of visible to the police. So things like that, just having those specific nuances and specific law enforcement requirements from staff. The other thing I want to point out just really quickly is that the Code Silver policy in itself is very simple. And it's really the recovery aspect of it that's going to be very complex for your site. It's the continuation of operations. How do we maintain? I think Shane touched on this as providing critical care for our patients. We're still a hospital. We have patients coming in. Ambulances might be coming in. Maintaining, psychological safety for staff members that went through something very difficult and crime scene management. So I just wanted to touch on that as well. And that's something that the police force are very helpful in sort of discussing with our staff.
Thanks. It's a really great point, and I'm going to mention that in my closing comment. Mary, last word from the panel.
Oh, wow, that's pressure. I was going to say to Mike's point, we could have a whole other session on the recovery. But I would say again, because we are provincial, we have a mix of municipal police forces and HcEM-P, and some have protection services and some have contract security. So again, it's about bringing that together, train together, respond together. And to be able to bring in, you can't always bring them in, but in those training sessions, bringing in your local law enforcement, if you have a liaison within that too, to be able to get inside the tentacles of a hospital that exists, to be able to navigate their way and to be able to have that sharings. But my one recommendation is to have that designated liaison who is the one building those relationships with local law enforcement to get them in those doors within the health system as well, whether it's protection services or your emergency management teams as well, because when there is a gap there, then you're going to have a gap in that response as well. And so for us, we have law enforcement informed the development of the policy and the procedures. And now it's a matter of just trying to get that training together in that space, which is imperfect. So we did have for expectations for healthcare, because it's such a traumatic experience, even having policing coming into your sites in itself. And so we've had them included in our virtual training, our online training as well, about for staff what to expect in a law enforcement response to an event of this nature, to help just mitigate when we can't get those in through those doors. So we set up both sides for those expectations.
Okay, we are officially just past time, and I knew we were going to try and jam-pack the session. As I said at the very beginning, sort of a scratching of the surface of this very complex topic, which at the same time we're trying to simplify. I think there's certainly room to really expand on our conversation as far as what our training programs look like, our lived experience, for those that have actually gone through one of these situations. There's lots of learnings that could come back to the audience to share, as well as just that touching on security and the variations in the types of security teams that you have and the expectations of those staff. Lots of things here. And I didn't want to forget, Mike mentioned recovery. And I want to say maybe Shane or Jeff had mentioned something as far as, if there's an investigation that's taking place afterwards, as part of the hospital off limits now, that is an entirely separate session that we could have. And so I do want to extend the invitation to the panelists in the future that I think we can carry this conversation forward and have a follow-up session as a part of the CFAL series to kind of keep this going and touch on our training, our education, those collaborative efforts, just so that folks know you're not working alone on this. We know there's variation. Let's try and get some best practice nailed down. So thank you again to everyone on the panel. Really appreciate having Canada-wide representation today and you jumping on despite all those time zones. I'll give it over to Francesco just for the last closing statement there. Again, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Misha. Yeah, I just wanted to also echo my thanks to everyone on the panel for taking the time to be here today. Like Misha mentioned, it's great to have representation from across Canada, and we appreciate you all making the effort to be here given the time zone differences that some of you have. And of course, thank you to Misha again for moderating the session and for helping us put everything together for the whole series, and especially for your work putting together such a diverse panel from across Canada for today. And also just thank you to our participants, to our audience for being here, taking the time to interact and taking time out of their day to join us here live. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel shortly. So please find it there if you would like to rewatch it or if you'd like to share it with anybody in your network. This is also a monthly series, so we will have another session on Wednesday, June 3rd. Please also mark that on your calendar and again, share the registration with anyone in your network who might not be registered yet but would be interested. And I did share my email address in the chat for anyone who has any follow-up questions for any of our speakers from today's session or any of our other sessions. Please reach out to me and I'll connect you to the appropriate speaker. And with that said, just one last big thank you to everyone. Really appreciate everything today. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day.